Good afternoon. I hope your week is going well. The school year is winding down. Our students at St. Peter's only have a few more days before summer break. We had a great time at our church and school picnic last Sunday. The food was delicious and it was fun to connect with our school families. The afternoon games got rained out, but the kids put on an entertaining music program and the basket raffle brought in more than $5,500 for our school. Many thanks to everyone who helped set up, serve, and clean up afterward, even in the rain. It was worth it to see all the smiles on people's faces and enjoy being together. We can't wait to do it again next year. This week in our one-year chronological Bible reading plan, we continued through Kings and Chronicles. King Solomon's son, Rehoboam, started a civil war in Israel when he refused the advice of his older counselors. The northern tribes came to him after he had been anointed as king and asked that he would lighten the burden of heavy service that Solomon had placed on them. Their people had built the temple and palace and many other fortifications and cities. Rather than heeding the advice of the wise old counselors who told him to respond favorably to the people, Rehoboam instead listened to his young friends, who told him to say that he would make the people's burdens heavier because he was stronger than his father. Naturally, the northern tribes did not take that well. They broke away from Judah and formed their own country in the north, Israel. For their own king, they brought back Jeroboam, a rebel leader who had been promised by a prophet that God would give him 10 tribes from Israel because of Solomon's sins. The kings in both Israel and Judah got progressively worse, especially in Israel. The worst Israelite king was Ahab. He married the Sidonian princess Jezebel and started to serve her god, Baal. The prophet Elijah told Ahab that there would be no dew or rain for the next few years except at his word. Usually, a prophet first receives a word from the Lord and then proclaims it. But Elijah seems to have said this on his own. God told him to hide in a ravine, which dried up from the drought. Then God told Elijah to go to Zarephath in Sidon and stay with a widow there. He asked her to bring him some water and a piece of bread. She replied that she only had a little bit of oil and flour left, and that she was going to make it into one last small cake for her and her son to eat before they died of starvation. But Elijah promised that God would make the jar of flour and jug of oil last until God sent rain on the land. And God did exactly that. They ate for many, many days without it running out. Later, the widow's son died, but Elijah prayed for him and he came back to life. Eventually, Elijah had a showdown with King Ahab and the 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, where they worshipped Baal. People from all over Israel gathered on the mountain. Elijah said to the people, "How long will you dance between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." He challenged the prophets of Baal to build an altar and put wood and a bull on it for a sacrifice, but not set fire to it. He would do the same, and whichever God responded with fire would be recognized as the true God. The people agreed to the challenge. The prophets of Baal laid their sacrifice and prayed and danced around their altar, but there was no answer. At noon, Elijah taunted them, telling them that perhaps Baal was asleep or relieving himself, and that they should cry out louder to get his attention. They shouted even more and even slashed themselves with swords and spears, but there still was no answer. Then Elijah rebuilt an altar to the Lord with 12 stones for the 12 tribes of Israel. He put the wood and the sacrifice on it. He dug a trench around the altar and had 12 huge jars of water brought up the mountain and poured over the sacrifice until it filled the trench. Then he prayed to the Lord to show his glory, and God rained down fire that consumed the wood, the sacrifice, the stones of the altar, and licked up all the water of the trench. The people worshipped God, and Elijah had all the prophets of Baal put to death. The Lord triumphed over Baal. God finally sent rain, and Elijah ran ahead of Ahab's chariot in the storm. But when Queen Jezebel heard that her prophets had been killed, she sent word to Elijah that she would do the same to him. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. He was sustained by food from an angel and traveled 40 days into the wilderness until he reached Mount Sinai. The Lord asked him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I've been faithful to you, but the Israelites have desecrated your altars. They've abandoned you, and they've killed all your prophets, and I'm the only one left, and now they seek to take my life." While Elijah was hiding in a cave, God sent a great wind, and then a great earthquake, and then a great fire. But God was not in any of them. And then came the sound of crushed silence. Some Bibles translate it a gentle whisper, but in Hebrew it's crushed silence, a deafening silence. Elijah wrapped himself in his cloak and came out of the cave. God asked him again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered with the same woe is me speech. He was washed up as a prophet. The Lord told him, "All right, go on your way. But first, I want you to anoint these different kings in other countries and anoint Elisha as your replacement." Well, Elijah anointed Elisha reluctantly and said afterwards, "What have I done to you?" We'll hear more about what God did through Elisha next week. Ahab and Jezebel finally died for their wickedness, but the kings who came after them were no better, as we will read in the following days. Hope to see you in worship for Father's Day weekend. We have a special gift for all the dads this Sunday, and Zach Carr will be singing. Our summer services are at 8:30 and 10:15. Have a great rest of the week.